Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between green hills, there lived a young boy named Leo. Leo had big dreams, dreams that took him far beyond the borders of his village. While most children his age were content playing with toys or helping their families with daily chores, Leo spent his days staring at the sky, imagining what lay beyond the mountains. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Leo sat by the river, his favorite spot to think. He often wondered what it would be like to see the world, to visit cities with tall buildings, to sail across oceans, and to meet people from distant lands. But there was one thing that held him back: fear. He feared that his dreams might be too big, too impossible to reach. As he sat there, lost in thought, an old man appeared by the river. His clothes were worn, but his eyes sparkled with wisdom. "Why do you look so troubled, young one?" the man asked, sitting next to Leo. "I have big dreams," Leo replied. "But I fear they are too big for me. What if I fail?" The old man smiled gently. "The greatest journeys often begin with the smallest steps. You must not be afraid of failure, for it is through failure that we learn and grow." Leo looked at the old man, unsure. "But how can I start? I have nothing." The man chuckled softly. "You have something far more valuable than any material possession: your heart. Follow what excites you, and let your curiosity guide you." That night, Leo couldn't sleep. The old man's words echoed in his mind. Follow what excites you. The next morning, with a newfound sense of courage, Leo packed a small bag and left his village, setting off on an adventure to find the world he had always dreamed of years past. And Leo traveled across seas, climbed mountains, and saw wonders beyond imagination. He met people from all walks of life, learned new languages, and discovered that the world was much more vast and beautiful than he had ever imagined. But it was not the destinations that changed him the most. It was the journey itself. With every step he took, Leo learned that dreams were not just destinations to be reached, they were the courage to take the first step, the strength to keep going when things got tough, and the wisdom to know that the journey was just as important as the dream. One day, Leo found himself standing on a hill overlooking a bustling city. He smiled, realizing that he had finally reached one of his dreams. But he also knew that his journey was far from over. The world was still full of wonders to explore, and he had only just begun. And so, the dreamer continued his journey, ever eager to see what lay ahead. As Leo wandered through the bustling city, he couldn't help but marvel at the life around him. Tall buildings seemed to touch the sky, and the streets were alive with people from all over the world. But despite the excitement, there was a feeling of loneliness that crept into his heart. Though he had traveled far and met many people, there was still something missing. He hadn't found the one thing he had been searching for all this time: a sense of belonging. One evening, as Leo sat in a small cafe watching the sunset, a girl named Alara approached him. She had been traveling as well, and her eyes held the same spark of curiosity that Leo had seen in the old man's eyes so many years ago. "Do you ever feel like you're searching for something, but you don't know what it is?" Alara asked, sitting down next to Leo. Leo smiled softly, recognizing the same longing in her voice. "Every day," he replied. "I've seen so many places and met so many people, but something is always missing." Alara nodded. "Maybe it's not about finding something, but about creating it. Sometimes, the journey isn't just about discovering the world. It's about discovering ourselves, and the connections we make along the way." Leo thought about her words for a long time. He had always focused on the places he wanted to see, the experiences he wanted to have, but he had never truly considered the people he would meet along the way. Perhaps it was the connections with others that would complete his journey. Over the next few months, Leo and Alara traveled together, exploring new cities, volunteering in small villages, and meeting people who had stories to share. They found joy in helping others, whether it was teaching a child to read or building homes for families in need. Leo realized that, in helping others, he was slowly beginning to fill the emptiness inside. One day, while traveling through a remote village in the mountains, Leo met an elderly woman who had lived there her entire life. Her house was simple, but her heart was full of warmth. She invited Leo and Alara inside for tea, and as they sat by the fire, she shared her wisdom with them. "You both have traveled far, but remember this," the old woman said, her voice gentle yet firm. "The true beauty of life is not in how far you go, but in the love and kindness you give to others along the way. The connections you make are what truly shape your journey." Leo listened intently, realizing that the old woman was right. His journey had been about more than just seeing the world. It was about the relationships he had built, the lives he had touched, and the lessons he had learned along the way. As the days passed, Leo and Alara continued their travels, but now with a new understanding. They no longer sought to find something outside themselves. Instead, they focused on the people they met, the moments they shared, and the impact they could have on the world. Years later, Leo returned to the village where he had first begun his journey. He was no longer the young boy who had dreamt of exploring the world. He was a man who had seen the world and, more importantly, had learned that the greatest journey of all was the journey within. And so, Leo continued his adventure, not just in the world around him, but in the hearts and minds of those he met. For he had discovered that the greatest dreams were not just about what we see, but about how we change the world through the love and kindness we share. Years passed, and Leo's adventures continued to shape him into the man he had always hoped to become, a person who understood that the real treasures of life were not found in the things one could collect, but in the experiences and connections one could build. He had traveled to countless places, and each place had taught him something new. Yet, there was one place he had never visited, one last destination that had always lingered in his heart, the village where his journey had started. One autumn afternoon, Leo returned to the small village nestled between the green hills. It had been many years since he had left, and the village had changed in small ways. The children who once played in the streets were now adults with families of their own. The familiar faces of his childhood were no longer there, but he still felt a deep connection to the land and the memories of his youth. As he walked through the village, he made his way to the old riverbank, the place where he had first met the wise old man all those years ago. The river still flowed gently, just as it had when he had sat there, dreaming of faraway lands. Leo sat down by the river, closing his eyes and letting the cool breeze wash over him. He remembered the advice the old man had given him: the greatest journeys often begin with the smallest steps. Leo smiled, realizing how far he had come. He had taken many steps, both small and large, but it had been the smallest steps, the ones made with courage and curiosity, that had brought him to where he was today. Just then, he heard footsteps approaching, and when he turned, he saw Alara walking towards him. They had stayed in touch throughout their travels, and although their paths had occasionally separated, they had always found their way back to one another. Alara sat down beside Leo, and they shared a quiet moment by the river, both reflecting on the many years of their shared journey. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed in the village? Alara asked, looking out over the water. Leo thought for a moment. Sometimes, he said slowly. But I think I needed to leave to truly understand what was important. The world has taught me so much, but it was coming back here, to where it all began, that made me realize something. This place, these people, they were always a part of me. Ilara nodded, understanding. The journey doesn't end when we reach a destination. It keeps evolving, keeps unfolding, like the river we sit by. It's always moving forward. Leo smiled, knowing that the old woman's words still held truth. The true beauty of life is not in how far you go, but in the love and kindness you give to others along the way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light across the river, Leo and Ilara sat in silence, content in the knowledge that their journey was not just about discovering the world, but about discovering who they were and the connections they had made along the way. Their journey would never truly end. For life itself, like the river, was always flowing, always changing, and always offering new adventures. And so, Leo continued his journey, no longer a dreamer of distant lands, but a creator of moments and memories, ever eager to embrace the unknown, with an open heart and a soul ready to share the love and kindness he had gathered along the way. As Leo and Ilara sat in quiet reflection by the river, the world around them seemed to fade away. The vibrant hues of sunset turned into soft shades of twilight, and the gentle hum of the river was the only sound that filled the evening air. But even in the silence, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They had both come a long way, and yet, they knew their journey was far from over. Do you ever feel like there's more to discover? Ilara asked, her voice soft as she gazed out at the river's endless flow. Leo thought for a moment before answering. I've seen so much, but every day brings something new. I've realized that the world isn't just made of places, but of people, stories, and moments that you can't predict, but that change you forever. Ilara nodded thoughtfully. I think we've both been searching for something all these years, but maybe it's not about finding it. Maybe it's about creating it, piece by piece, with every choice we make and every step we take. Leo smiled at her wisdom. You're right. The journey is never really about reaching the destination. It's about becoming who we're meant to be along the way. As the night grew darker, they both knew that their travels had only just begun. The world was still vast, and there were so many places left to explore, so many people left to meet. But now, they didn't feel the need to rush. Their journey wasn't just about crossing borders or climbing mountains, it was about embracing the beauty of the present moment and the connections they made along the way. The next day, Leo and Ilara made a decision. They would return to the village once more, not as travelers passing through, but as part of the community, contributing what they had learned from their journeys. They would teach the children about the world, not through textbooks or maps, but through the stories of their adventures, the lessons they had learned, and the people they had met. They spent the following years in the village, sharing their wisdom, helping others, and living out the lessons they had gained from their travels. They built a small school by the riverbank, where the village children gathered every day to listen to stories of faraway lands and learn about the world beyond the hills. But more importantly, they taught them how to dream, how to follow their hearts, and how to make the world a better place with kindness and compassion. And as the years went by, Leo often found himself sitting by the river once more, just as he had all those years ago. But this time, he wasn't just dreaming of far-off places. He had created a life full of adventure, love, and purpose, a life that was rooted in the small village, yet reached out to the world. One evening, as Leo sat by the river with his children, watching the sunset paint the sky with colors of gold and purple, he realized that the greatest journey of all was not the one that took him to distant lands, but the one that brought him back home, to the place where it all began. His journey had come full circle, but Leo knew deep down that the story was never truly over. It would continue with every new day, every new person he met, and every new dream that took root in his heart, for the dreamer's journey, like the river, would always flow forward endlessly, beautifully, and with love. Years passed in the village, and Leo had become an integral part of the community. His life was no longer one of constant travel and distant horizons, but of quiet contentment, woven with the threads of every person he met and every life he touched. Yet, as much as he had embraced his role as a teacher and guide, there was still a sense of wonder that flickered within him. The world beyond the village, the vast unknown, still called to him from time to time. One crisp autumn morning, Leo received a letter from a fellow traveler. The letter was from a woman he had met many years ago during his travels in a distant country. She had continued her journey, exploring lands he had never set foot in, and had discovered something that she felt was worth sharing with him. The letter spoke of a place hidden deep in the mountains, where the last whispers of ancient wisdom were said to be preserved, a place where only those who sought it with a pure heart could find. Reading the letter, Leo felt a spark of curiosity, the same feeling he had when he first left the village all those years ago. But now, as a man who had learned the importance of the present moment and the connections he had made, he hesitated. Could this new adventure be a step backward? Was it time to leave the village again, to chase after something unknown, when everything he had worked for was right here? Elara, now a close companion and confidant, noticed the change in Leo. She had seen that same look in his eyes many times before, the pull of something greater, the desire to continue seeking, even when he had already found so much. "You're thinking about the journey again, aren't you?" she asked gently one evening, as they sat together by the river. Leo nodded, his thoughts heavy. "A part of me feels like I need to go, to see this place, to discover what it holds. But another part of me wonders if I've already found what I was looking for." Elara looked at him with understanding. "Leo, your journey has always been about seeking, about finding new horizons. But don't forget, you've also learned that the greatest journeys are the ones we take inside ourselves. The world is vast, and there's always more to discover. But don't let the search for more take away from the beauty of what you've already created here." Leo sighed, appreciating her wisdom. "I know. I've been so focused on the idea of seeking that I sometimes forget the richness of the life I've built. But a part of me still wonders, what if there's something waiting for me out there, something I can't even imagine?" Elara smiled warmly. "Maybe. But think about this. You've created a place where dreams are born and nurtured, where you've shared all that you've learned. Maybe that's the greatest discovery of all. You've found a way to make a difference, not by traveling the world, but by helping others create their own journeys." Leo sat in silence, reflecting on Elara's words. He had spent so many years chasing the idea of adventure, of discovering new places, but now he realized that the adventure was not just about seeing the world, it was about shaping the world, one life at a time. After a long pause, Leo turned to Elara with a thoughtful expression. "Perhaps the greatest journey is not the one we take to find something new. Perhaps it's the journey we take to give back, to share what we've learned, and to help others discover their own path." Elara smiled. "Exactly. The world is waiting for you, Leo. But perhaps the most important journey is the one you've already started here." The next morning, Leo made a decision. He would not leave for the hidden place in the mountains. Instead, he would focus on the community he had built and continue to help others discover their own dreams. He would take the lessons he had learned on his travels and use them to inspire the next generation, guiding them to follow their hearts and create their own journeys. As the seasons passed, Leo found peace in his decision. His heart, once restless and driven by the desire to seek something new, was now content. The village was thriving, and the children who had once listened to his stories now shared their own, carrying forward the wisdom and love that had been passed down to them. And while Leo's physical journey had slowed, his inner journey had only just begun. He had come to understand that the most profound adventures were not those that took him to far-off lands, but those that helped him grow, connect, and give back to the world around him. One evening, many years later, as Leo sat by the river with his grandchildren, telling them stories of his travels, he realized that his journey had not been about finding something outside of himself. It had been about discovering the depths of his own heart and the infinite ways he could share that love with the world. And so, Leo's story continued, ever evolving, ever flowing, like the river beside him, with new lessons to learn and new horizons to explore, all within the rich tapestry of his life. As the years unfolded, Leo's role in the village grew deeper. His school by the riverbank had flourished into a vibrant center of learning, not just for the children, but for everyone in the village who yearned for knowledge and growth. The lessons of love, adventure, and kindness that Leo had gathered from his travels were now ingrained in the hearts of those around him. And yet, even though his life was rich with meaning and purpose, there was always a small voice within him, whispering, calling him to the unknown. One evening, as Leo sat alone in the old wooden chair by the river, watching the stars twinkle in the dark sky, he felt the familiar tug of adventure once again. The world outside the village, though distant, seemed to be waiting for him. He could feel the pull of the endless horizons, the places still untouched, the mysteries yet to be discovered. But as he sat in the silence, a realization dawned upon him. The journey he had taken had already shaped him in ways he could never have imagined. The adventures of his past had taught him that the world was vast, but what truly mattered was the love and the lives he had touched along the way. The beauty of his journey was not in the places he had seen, but in the people he had met and the moments they had shared. It was then that Leo understood something profound. Adventure could take many forms. It was not just about going somewhere new or discovering something unknown. Sometimes, the greatest adventure was about staying where you were and continuing to grow, to help others find their own way, and to deepen the connections that had already been made. The following morning, Leo gathered the children by the river as he often did. But today, he had something different to share with them, a story not of distant lands or grand adventures, but of the small, everyday moments that held the true magic of life. He spoke of the beauty in the quiet, in the simple acts of kindness, and in the power of a single conversation that could change the course of a life. "You see," Leo said, his eyes shining as he looked around at the children, "the world may seem vast, and the journey may seem endless. But sometimes, the most important part of the journey is the person you become along the way. It's about the choices you make, the love you give, and the dreams you inspire in others." As he spoke, Leo felt a sense of peace settle in his heart. He no longer felt the need to search for something beyond what he had already found. The world around him, with its small, everyday wonders, was enough. The village, the people, the river, they were all part of a greater story, one that continued to unfold in unexpected ways. That evening, as Leo returned to his home, he paused for a moment, looking out over the land he had come to love so dearly. The hills, the trees, the winding paths, they were no longer just a backdrop to his journey. They were a part of him, and he was a part of them. And for the first time in many years, Leo realized that he had come full circle. The journey, in its truest sense, was not about finding a destination, but about embracing the process of becoming. Becoming the person who could love, who could give, who could teach, and who could listen. Becoming the person who knew that every step, no matter how small, was an important part of the grand adventure. And so, as the seasons continued to pass, Leo found joy not just in the moments of excitement and discovery, but in the quiet, everyday blessings of life. The river beside him continued to flow, just as it had always done, a constant reminder that life itself was the greatest journey of all. Years later, when Leo had grown older and his hair had turned silver, he would often sit by the river with his grandchildren. He would tell them stories of his travels and the lessons he had learned, but he would also remind them that the greatest treasures in life were the simple things, the love of family, the beauty of a sunset, and the gift of being present in each moment. His journey had indeed been long, but in the end, Leo knew that it was not the distance he had traveled that mattered, but the love and wisdom he had gathered along the way. And as he watched the river flow gently by, he smiled, knowing that the journey would never truly end. It would continue, in the hearts of those he had touched, and in the stories that would be passed down for generations to come. For the dreamer's journey, like the river, was eternal, ever-flowing, ever-changing, and always full of wonder. As the years went by, Leo grew older, and his heart found peace in the life he had built. One evening, as he sat by the river with his grandchildren, he realized that the journey he had longed for had not been about reaching distant places or discovering new lands. It had been about the wisdom gained from each step, the connections made along the way, and the lives he had touched. The adventure, he now understood, was never in the places he visited, but in the people he met and the love he gave. With a gentle smile, he looked at the sparkling river, knowing that the greatest discoveries often came from within. The children around him listened intently as Leo shared the stories of his travels. But instead of recounting distant lands, he spoke of the power of listening, of the quiet moments when one truly connects with another. He told them that the most profound experiences were often the ones that came when they least expected them, when they took the time to listen, to care, and to understand. The world is vast, Leo said, his voice filled with a calm wisdom, but the journey is in every moment you choose to make meaningful. One day, Leo wandered to the old stone school where his journey had begun. The classrooms that had once been filled with young faces now stood silent, but the memories of the children he had taught lingered in the air. He touched the worn desks and smiled softly, knowing that every lesson he had shared was a seed planted in the hearts of those who would continue the work. This is where it all started, he thought, and now it will never end. For the impact of his teachings would continue to ripple through the village for generations to come. As Leo sat by the river, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he realized that the greatest adventure of all was not in seeking something far away, but in appreciating the journey right where he was. His life had come full circle, and the peace he had longed for was not found in the distant mountains or the unknown lands, but in the quiet joy of knowing that he had lived a life of purpose, love, and discovery. The journey, he now knew, was eternal, not in the places traveled, but in the hearts touched, the lessons learned, and the legacy left behind. 2 additional paragraphs to further develop the story. As the years continued to pass, Leo became a symbol of wisdom and peace in the village. People traveled from near and far to hear his stories, to sit with him by the river, and to learn from the quiet strength he embodied. Yet, Leo never saw himself as a teacher in the traditional sense. He believed that everyone had their own journey to undertake, and all he could offer was the space for others to find their own answers. He would often say, "The greatest lessons are the ones we find within ourselves, when we are brave enough to listen to the quiet voice of our hearts." It was this simple, profound wisdom that left a lasting imprint on the lives of those who met him one spring afternoon. As Leo sat beneath the tree that had shaded him for so many years, he closed his eyes and reflected on the journey of his life. He realized that in all the years of seeking and wandering, it was the moments of stillness and reflection that had brought him the most profound understanding. The world, with its noise and chaos, had once seemed like a place to conquer, but now he knew that it was a place to embrace. In the stillness, Leo understood that the most important discovery was not the destination, but the journey itself and the people we become along the way.